Welcome to today's webinar in our AI and our Future series. Our focus today is caring, empathy, and algorithms, that is, AI as it's being applied in health, education, social, and counseling services. These professions exist to serve people, yet they face constant tension. Individuals wanting care, corporations seeking markets, institutions negotiating how care is delivered, and the professions themselves. So here's the big question. Can machines care? AI now reaches into healthcare, education, counseling, and even spiritual services. It brings efficiencies and new possibilities through coaching, through mentoring, through counseling, through caring in general, but also raises concerns about empathy, trust, and human connection. Will AI give us more personalized care or more institutional control? To help us explore this today, I'll be interviewing Peter Fenwick on health, Stephen Murgatroyd, who is joining us remotely on education, and Randy Poon on social and spiritual services. Together, they'll help us consider how AI is, should, and will reshape our caring in the future. So let's begin with Stephen Murgatroyd. If we look at the next 3 to 5 years, where do we think AI assist co-pilots will most meaningfully support or possibly disrupt relational work in the caring professions, in this instance, teaching? And how do we safeguard against these human-to-human moments that are core to quality care? Assuming care is a fundamental and empathy is a fundamental element in the teaching.
Yeah, and I think the key difference teachers make versus knowledge systems make is connecting to people called kids and making a massive difference to who they are and what they think and feel about themselves. So that's the fundamental job of the teacher, no matter what the resources are that they're trying to work with. What we're seeing is essentially the horseless carriage stage of any technology. We're using AI to do better and faster and cheaper some of the things we shouldn't be doing at all, like lots of exam marking, or we shouldn't be doing exams, lots of kind of curriculum knowledge transfer, which is not exactly a smart use of our time. We also have, I mean, we've just finished some work with about 2,000 kids in the Toronto School District, looking at what the kids are doing with AI. And sure, a small group are cheating, but it's the same people who've been cheating since the Ming Dynasty. What the real use is to support their understanding of what it is they're being asked to learn. The other big use of AI, because it's got so many affordances, is to support kids with special needs, newcomers who have language challenges because of the translation facilities, and students who need differentiated instruction, who are struggling with concepts, key skills, whatever it may be. They can get 24/7 chatbot tutoring, and to support their kind of learning development. So what we found was the majority of students who are using AI probably 2 or 3 times a day are using it to support their learning and to deepen their learning and understanding. So that's what we see. There are challenges, and the kids are even more aware of these than many of their teachers. So I think we're at a kind of very early stage of deployment.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to weigh in on this topic? Let's hear your perspective.
Well, thanks, Barry. I've been asked to take a health and healthcare lens. I'm not an academic. I'm very much a practitioner who grew up in industry in large multinational publicly traded healthcare companies, technology companies, and then morphed in my career into the delivery arm of healthcare inside of Alberta Health Services. I ran the innovation portfolio for 3 years, but then afterwards spent time in government and spent time in the insurance world, and have been part of several startups and then currently invested in three, all of which are using AI in some way, shape, or form in order to refine how they are either being a digital platform or a digital therapeutic to the populations that they're serving. So, if you don't mind, I think there's a couple of things that I wrote down specifically that Stephen said, which is the role of humans. He said teachers and professors, educators, but I think what he really meant was the role of of the human connection in order to express caring and empathy in a teaching environment is about connecting to people. Now, specifically, he said connecting and influencing what they think and feel about themselves. What he didn't really talk to was where are the deficits that already exist within the post-secondary educational system and the gaps that are widening between the way math is taught in a elementary school through high school level, and how critical thinking skills are largely absent from someone's way of thinking when they graduate from high school, and it's not really focused on a lot in the university capacity. So there's that gap that the human element hasn't even fully closed yet in an educational system component. And I currently work for a university. I work for Mount Royal University in Calgary, and I see this in undergraduate. I'm currently on faculty at University of Lethbridge in the School of Graduate Studies, and I see this when I teach master's students. So I think, yes, it is about what they think and feel about themselves, but there's also a significant gap that's not being closed around the way we behave as humans in society, and whether AI supports that or hinders that, to be determined. In a healthcare setting, and Perry, you and I talked about this a little bit ahead of time. It's not new to think about how basic algorithms and various types of machine learning and becoming more and more advanced over the last 20 years, but it's not new to be thinking about basic things like pattern recognition and decision support tools. 20 years ago, when I was inside General Electric, we were helping radiologists with computer-aided decision support tools. They weren't often used, but they were a feature that were regularly purchased as part of the systems. Fast forward to some of the research that came out of the early days of AMI, Alberta Institute for Machine Learning and Intelligence. We had U of A researchers looking at pattern recognition using data sets that we held inside the diagnostic imaging repositories of Alberta Health Services, but damned if that could get into a commercial practice. Like, it was a great research tool, but it didn't necessarily find its way to scale because it needed an entity to take to market. It needed somebody to buy and license the software, and it needed to be spread more broadly than just the research project or the small number of individuals who are touched by the research project. So I think it's not a new area. I want to make sure we're distinguishing, though, between acute care, primary care, preventative care. And maybe a better way to look at this is we've seen elements of machine learning and artificial intelligence impact the pharmaceutical industry, the way drugs are developed. We have huge issues within the way pharmaceuticals are developed in the model of the human anatomy that they tend to include versus exclude, as everybody on this call is included. I don't see any female on this call. Most drugs that come to market are designed off of a male model, not off of a female model, because women are excluded at some point during the research project because of the complexities of dealing with the menstruation cycle. And I don't know that AI is ever going to capture or close the gap on that, but there are teams that are working on that. That's like how drugs are developed, how drugs are discovered, opportunities are discovered. But we want to distinguish upstream work, call it midstream work, if you will, like with what the public system in Canada largely funds in primary care and acute care. And then take a look at the humanity side of what we talked about just before this started, which is what actually happens in the earlier or later stages of life when you have neurological challenges, neurodegenerative challenges that may or may not be augmented. So all that to say is, and Pierre, you'll remember this from a talk that I gave through ABC Tech almost a decade ago, the tsunami of seniors, people who are over 55 now, is getting bigger and bigger. And the people who are the generations behind us, there are not enough of them going into the caring professions to be able to close the human health resources gap. And so there needs to be some kind of a a meshing of things together to deal with that supply demand gap.
Okay, well, that's a good point of transition because in talking about education or talking about healthcare, it's so easy to talk from the top down. The supplier, the pharma, the medicine, the surgery, all the technology that's been employed, and forget the mind part of the mind-body problem, which is the relationship of the patient or the client to the professional. So, Randy, your focus is counseling, spiritual counseling. Probably going to be a little bit easier from you to hear about the relevance of AI in quote caring, as
Sure.
opposed to quote health per se, although it plays a significant role in treatment. So let's wax eloquent about of your views.
Well, I mean, my role isn't specifically spiritual counseling. I am a executive coach. I'm a trainer, but I come from a very strong faith background as well, and so it really my faith very much informs how I work with people with all kinds of clients. Ultimately, in the end, it's very much relational, the work that I do. I think in terms of being able to, we've talked about connecting, and the power of connection is so critical. I also taught for 10 years. I was a professor as well at Ambrose University, so I led the business program. So working with students very directly was was very much a part of my approach. And I think that whole idea of connection, for example, is really what it comes down to, whether it's AI or not. In the end, it really comes down to connection. We can teach, we can do any of our jobs, but if we do it whether with or without AI, but if we do it without that sense of connection, that creates gaps. And so ultimately, in the end, a lot of, as I was explore the various questions for today, in many ways, it's how do we use it? How do we approach it in the end? Um, and so for myself, in terms of the work that I do as an executive coach, and in some ways, there's certainly an aspect of, I guess, a spirit-like type counseling that takes place is very much listening to people, finding out listening to what their needs are ultimately in the end, exploring the work that I do oftentimes takes a look at, what people's goals are, what their vision is, who do they want to be, what's the best version of themselves, and as well, having them, inviting them to a place where, you know, where are their gaps? How are they getting in their own way? Really having that honest realization of, what if I dealt with this in the end? And it takes a lot of listening. It takes a lot of understanding because we can be threatened when we typically, encounter someone and we sort of say, "Here's what's wrong with you." Um, we're all going to object. We're all going to go, "No, no, no." And we're going to be defensive. But in the end, that from that human connection perspective, what's really critical is presence, and at the same time, too, being courageous enough to invite people into a conversation in areas where, let's say, it's tough to explore in the first place. If we have, let's say, conversations where we listen, but we're not inviting people into taking courageous steps or to exploring those tough areas of their life, then we're not really helping them. We're just kind of being sort of like, okay, yeah, yeah, we agree with people, and that's essentially it. And so I think it's that combination of both.
So the AI is being portrayed by some as having the capacity to mimic, synthesize, simulate those relational elements that you've referred to. So by the late 2020s, we may see system level orchestration. We've divided the human being up into so many silos and so many specialties, so many parts of the body, so many different treatments. Even the mind-body issue continues to be prevalent in psychology versus physical care. Some say that AI will allow more coordination of patient care. We can deal with the person instead of dealing with the affliction. We can deal with student learning pathways. We can deal with social services, all of that in near real time because AI doesn't have a problem with those boundaries. How do we ensure that these systems are trustworthy and equitable? And you might want to comment on this integration and its feasibility. So I'll start out with you, Randy, and then I'll go to Stephen and then end up with Peter. Go ahead, Randy.
For
Do you
sure.
see systems integration coming as a product of AI?
I think very much so. And I think I think one of the things that's really powerful with AI is the ability to be able to address gaps. There are we have so many sort of resource related issues in terms of being able to serve a broader number of people. And I think I see AI as a way of being able to address some of those gaps that we have. However, and this is the big however, it's as I work with AI extensively, and in the work that I do, And in working with AI, you discover both the pros and the cons with AI. You see where the flaws are. And in many ways, it requires, like, for example, in developing, let's say, custom GPTs, you see the kinds of responses that you get. And I mean, we've all heard and very familiar with, AI hallucinating. Um, in part, it's also how you feed the information into it. And so in many ways, in terms of this sort of the system level orchestration, it's going to take people who are involved in these caring professions, these caring areas, to be involved in the design of what we produce in the first place. If we don't, in other words, if we try to do it quick and easy, let's just throw in a question and have AI sort of generate a response. We're not going to get very good quality in the first place. It requires intricate working with AI to be able to test it out, to be able to see what we're getting in the first place. For example, let's say in working with, let's say, feeding, let's say when you're doing a GPT, for example, there are instruction sets you can provide it. There are files you can upload. What's the quality of files that we are importing or uploading into the AI to ensure that, let's say, the philosophy or approach is actually embedded in there. So we can guide AI in that regard. But if we try to do it, quick and easy, it's not going to happen. And we rely too much then on AI to generically produce what we want.
Okay, well, that's a caution in terms of how we actually employ AI. Peter, from your perspective, I mean, if there's any system that is more siloed, than healthcare, I don't know what it is, but do you think that the healthcare system will evolve in keeping with what AI can now make available, which is to deal with the whole person, social, psychological, physical,
Yeah.
medicine?
Yeah. My short answer is no. I don't believe it's going to happen in the next 5 years. And I'm saying that as someone who has enough gray hairs and remembers what bidirectional, interfaces look like in the 90s in order to get simple data around admissions, discharge, transfer data move between siloed systems inside of a hospital. We still spend tens of, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year on trying to get software systems to talk to each other. And Epic, by the way, Connect Care is not the answer to everything. It still excludes a lot. So no, I don't see it. I don't see it's not just an AI thing.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it's all well and good to say we've got an opportunity to fix something and to be confronted by resistance to change and status quo. Okay, Stephen, what's your perspective? Let me see if I can get Stephen up.
Well, I think we also need to ensure they're secure. And so, we've just had a massive cyber attack on our school system about Power School, which is a major platform used throughout Canada, got hacked. Personal and private data was leaked to third parties. So I think security is one kind of issue that school systems are worried about. We still have problems with hallucination, with bias. There's virtually nothing in AI systems about indigenous ways of knowing and thinking. There's a little bit coming, but that's really not there. There's not a lot about really good quality history of minorities in Canada online. So we have a lot of bias issues and a lot of hallucination issues. And the kids are very smartly trying to deal with that. So there are consortiums of indigenous learners working to make sure that Gemini in particular and Copilot have a lot more information about indigenous ways of knowing and the sacred teachings and so on. So there's a lot going on, but it's all kind of bitty. And the fantasy that some have is, oh, this is going to transform our school system. Well, get real. The vested interests in our school system not changing are bigger than the interest in transformation. And so I would say it's going to take more than a decade for us to see a significant shift, unless a new entrant comes in and changes the game. But our school systems, no, they're not going to change. Our universities and colleges, no, they're not going to change.
So we get into change management with any emerging technology. The point is very much echoes what Peter has said, which is the possibility of getting integration is going to be confronted with institutional rigidities. Okay, next question. Much of the debate is framed around job loss, but Foresight research suggests that task reconfiguration and the rising value of relational, ethical, and adaptive skills How should training and professional development evolve so that teachers, counselors, nurses, and social workers are ready for these changed roles? I'll start out with you, Randy. So we're talking here about how do we prepare counselors, spiritual leaders, and others for a world where relational skills are increasingly important, given the access to all of the knowledge that AI affords us.
Again, we take a look at I think what not Peter said, what Stephen said in terms of some of the gaps in terms of the biases and whatnot. I mean, I think this is where again, professionals who are in these caring and counseling areas need to bring the humanity of what they do into working with AI. Again, it's like anything else. I mean, it's like it is a tool more than it is absolutely a tool. And so again, if we expect it to do it automatically, I mean, it's certainly can create these wonderful responses, the predictive models. At the same time, too, though, they're there for us to be able to utilize. So in terms of training, I think in some ways it's training people in the caring areas, the counselors, how to utilize the tools, how to be familiar with them in the first place. What are the abilities? What are the powers of it? I think in some ways it can be easy, for example, for people in caring areas to say, well, I don't want to be involved with technology. I don't want to be involved in AI. I prefer the human touch, for example. At the same time, if we avoid these areas and we run away from them, then what that does is it creates a gap. It creates a void. And I think very much so. I am very much, again, I'm very AI forward, but I think we have to be involved in it though. It's not about AI in and of itself. It's the human touch, it's the caring part, it's the empathetic part that has to be involved in connecting with essentially AI and utilizing AI. So it's in some ways reducing that perhaps that reluctance, that avoidance, that fear aspect on the part of counselors to say, hey, you know what? This is an amazing tool to use, but it needs your humanity that you can bring to it.
But that becomes a new skill among many professionals which were hired because they were the smartest,
Hmm.
they were the most knowledgeable, but the relational skills were lacking. Now we know that in medicine, for example, the McMaster profile insists now that they look at the relational skills of students that they're bringing into the university to ensure that they have both the capacity to offer good bedside manner as well as knowledgeable. Peter, you want to jump in here about healthcare specifically?
When we were building the Airdrie Health Cooperative 10 years ago, we used a framework that seemed to resonate with the 36 primary care doctors that we got involved in. And it was three dimensions. If you think about like high, low, high, low, high, low, one was the degree to which a care worker wanted to interact with patients, the degree to which the care worker wanted to be interactive with the business or the administrative side of running healthcare. And then the third dimension was the degree to which they wanted to leverage technology in order to do what they do. And we've been having problems for a long time, call it 2 decades in primary care, to get people to change their practice in order to document not just the medical legal record, but to actually use it in a way that to your earlier point, Perry, takes a look at things through a more holistic lens, not just the physical lens, but making the time more than the 6-minute block per issue in order to actually get into the bigger issues. And I know one particular guest tonight has some things to say about caring in an addictions rehabilitative context. So I'd like that person to have time to say a few words at some point during our evening, Perry. I hope we're opening this up to a bigger conversation. The reason what I'm saying with this framework is important is that there are care workers, not just physicians, who don't want to get excessively involved in technology. They want to use the learning that they had at the beginning of their career with their own obligations through colleges for professional development. And they want to spend as much time as they can with people, and they don't want to be involved in the administrivia. And that's okay. There are people that are like that. But what we don't do is actually stratify and say, like, are you gradually gravitating towards that? Now, I have a neighbor here who's a physician professor through the University of Ottawa in the Ottawa Hospital, and he is actively working on the adoption of AI in the residency program because he's saying you guys can't get away from it. And it's not just to help them with the learning process, it's to help them with the caring process and understanding how to leverage new insights and knowledge. But the schools are struggling for sure. I
I mean,
have,
schools have somewhat of a different issue. We'll hear that next from Stephen. Is it's one thing to be one-on-one with your patient. It's another thing to have 30 kids in a classroom and to expect to provide some degree of personalization, which was what AI seems to be now offering.
That we are
Stephen.
working on is a network of schools around the world to explore that exact question. What does digital literacy and fluency look like for the adults in the room? What does that look like for the kids in the room? And so the OECD have been, with the help of some Albertans, by the way, have been developing a kind of program and set of protocols for digital literacy. And PISA 2029 will involve an assessment of where the world is in terms of these skill sets and so on. But I think that we are beginning to insert AI into initial professional training at the University of Alberta, and I'm sure that's happening elsewhere as well. There is real resistance of teacher trainees who are already kind of worried about complex classrooms, large class sizes, and now they have technology to deal with that is disruptive of teaching and learning. And so we're seeing some pushback from teachers, university professors, and so on, saying, no, we don't want to go here, really. It's too dangerous, too threatening. And in Ontario, there's a big pressure to go back to formalize exams with no technology, pen and paper for university students, because the big kind of concern is all this cheating nonsense. And so cheating is something we co-conspire to create by the fact that we put so much emphasis on grades and doing well that we forget that the business is learning.
Let me dig deeper there. Is the concerns of those that are resisting a fear of job loss, or are they really caring about whether or not that we're getting better education or better learning from the students?
I don't think anybody's talking about learning, because it's university or a college or a school. That's not what we do. But I think the concern is that they're going to have to change their behavior. It's not necessarily job loss, it's job change. And so the fear is, look, I've been doing this in this way for the last 10 years. Now you want me to do something completely different? And the answer is, actually, that would be helpful. So if your agenda is learning, what you're doing right now is no longer fit for purpose.
So you see the professional becoming more of a tutor or an aide than being the dominant authoritarian. Not.
Well, plus remember, the kids are always ahead of the teachers, always have been. And so the kids are saying, actually, no, sir, that's not quite right. When you look at the other side of this issue, then there are 4 other things you should consider. So the kids are now as smart, because we've got PhD level AI, are able to say to their teacher, whether it's a prof or an instructor in a college or a high school teacher, actually, no, that's not quite right. And so there's a lot more dynamic potential from unleashing AI, which will change teacher behavior. And yet, if you take the university world, for example, nobody's trained to be a teacher in the university world. It's kind of a crapshoot in terms of how good your instructors are. And now we can get better instruction from a lot of AI tools. And so the threat is not job loss, but you're going to have to change what it is you do in class with your students, and your relationship between knowledge, the student, and you is going to have to change.
The insight there is clearly it's not just the profession or the institutions, but the individual's reluctance to change. Peter, I see your hand up. You want to add something there?
I mean, there's an interesting evolution here, right? Because I remember 10 years ago speaking at CADTH, which is the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, and I was on a panel to talk about real world evidence and the use of real world evidence in order to drive innovation. And as fast forward 10 years, the potential, I think, is that for all those professions, including healthcare professions, who struggle with ongoing professional development, like to just make the hours that you're required to by your college, that's one thing. That's kind of checking the box. The other is, to Stephen's point, how is my behavior actually changing in the workplace? What am I applying from that learning when I'm already feeling overwhelmed by the volume of things that keep getting published? So is this an excessive amount of things that are published that's not really new insights? Am I gathering the actual new insights and finding a way to apply them to my patient population?
Stephen makes, I think, a very good point that the students are often ahead of the system. Patients seem to be getting ahead of the systems. Clients seem to be getting ahead of the system, expecting and demanding because they have more knowledge than they ever did before, better education, knowledge as a product of AI. They go into the relationship with the professional and they have expectations about a relationship. They want to be heard. They want to participate. And so we now have patients that are willing to be participants in their care. This is revolutionary. Other than when Randy applies Rogerian therapy, then of course that's partnerships in spades. Randy, next question. AI often struggles with bias, privacy, explainability. In high stakes contexts like healthcare, education, or social support, who should be accountable for decisions shaped by AI? The system designers, the organizations deploying it, or the frontline professionals? This is a very real question right now as a byproduct of that young man who committed suicide. That's a product of the empathy that AI provided to him, leading him to ultimately commit suicide because the system of AI was so empathetic of what he was seeking. So, Randy, who should be accountable?
All of the above.
Okay. Oh, we
Absolutely.
saved some time there.
I mean, in the end, it's really not. I mean, I love what Stephen said about, the crapshoot in terms of the kind of professor you get. I mean, my focus when I was I was a professor for 10 years, and my approach was very much student-centered. There's that balance in terms of the knowledge that you are required and invited to share with students and invite them to lean into. And yet, if we don't take responsibility, if we don't engage intentionally, then we're not really doing our job in the first place. And so I think you think about, where does the responsibility lie? From the design perspective, again, it's more than just the designers. Those involved in these professions need to be involved in the design side. We need to engage with the designers to basically to ensure that the designs are sensitive. Again, it was mentioned earlier about, indigenous voices. Where does that take place? We have to be purposeful and intentional in that regard. In terms of the organizations deploying it, again, how effectively are we training or equipping, let's say, our employees, those who work for us, to be able to engage with it actively, and then professionals as well too, very much so. AI doesn't. I mean, what I'm hearing, as we've been talking about it, it's what's really remarkable is that AI is there as a tool, and it's not going to. I think in so many ways, if we don't run from it, it can help us to equip those gaps. You think of, let's say, it from a professor perspective, or even from a medical professional, and what you mentioned earlier on in terms of patients getting ahead of us, students getting ahead of us. I think as professionals, if we engage AI as well, we can stay ahead as well. We now have available to us access to these resources where we don't have to be doing the research ourselves. We can utilize AI to be able to stay ahead, but that requires us taking a very different approach ourselves, though. If we are lazy in our approach, and I'll be harsh with that, if we are lazy in our approach, we will not be doing our jobs. We have to be engaged. And the only reasons that patients and students are ahead of us is because we're not doing our jobs ourselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Stephen to jump in here.
I still take the view that as, a professor teaching a course, it's my accountability. It's not AI's accountability. I'm accountable for ensuring my students understand how to critically assess and review what AI is producing. I'm accountable for assessing the ways in which students are deploying AI. I'm accountable for the quality and understanding of knowledge, competences, and skill my students end up with. And so I remain accountable. And I've been using EdTech tools since I joined the Open University in 1973. And so I'm a kind of leader in ed tech, pioneering all sorts of new approaches to teaching and learning. But it's still my accountability whether I'm using a box, a tool, or a AI. It's still me.
Okay, Peter, your perspective.
Yeah, healthcare is a funny space, right? Because we hedge our risks by pooling resources together. It's never one individual. If I'm paying for part of my 18-year-old to do his undergrad in economics is an individual consumer decision, and you're not often a consumer in healthcare. You're a beneficiary perhaps, but we pay into risk pools, whether it's through public taxes or employee-sponsored benefits programs. So there is absolutely an accountability for everyone who you've listed there, the system designers, the administrators, if you will, the professions. But what's missing in there is the public. What role should citizens actually be playing en masse, whether it's at the polls when we vote or it's in between elections in order to influence the way healthcare reform unfolds? There was very limited consultation with the dissolution of Alberta Health Services. That was a power grab on behalf of the premier. And the whole idea of decentralized decision making is not going to happen with the design that EY put together. It's going to be very interesting next 5 years to see what happens with that.
And
It gets to one of your earlier points around system level orchestration as being obstructed right now by the politicians, but we won't get into that. The question around who should be involved and who should be accountable, really, we don't have much choice in the way our system's designed. It's the politicians are accountable, but they don't want to be accountable.
well, from time to time, I mean, let's not deviate from the theme of the day, but if we get into governance, which we will when Peter McKinnon joins us in a week or two, um, politicians, if they are accountable, sooner or later get frustrated by the fact that the systems are not making change on their own and need to engage in authoritarian measures in order to bring about change. So I'm somewhat sympathetic to the frustrations which you have echoed yourself about the reluctance of the system and the professions and the unions to bring about change, leading ultimately to the politicians saying, in the interest of the public, something needs to be done. I'm going to leave it at that. You can
Yeah, I think you need it's I'm not going to use the word slippery slope. However, we can look south of the border politically, and you want to know what authoritarian starts to look like? Read Andrew Coyne's article in the Globe today.
Sure. Well, I know where Andrew Coyne comes from, but I've also read others who feel that the frustrations that 70 million people felt had reached a point where they were prepared to accept some authoritarian measures to bring about change. Okay, last topic.
Well, there's a group of us working out of Mount Royal and the University of Calgary, asking the question, what would happen if we broke up the monopoly of the public education system? What would happen if we said to the universities and the colleges, you can no longer offer certifications, degrees, diplomas, and so on? Your job is to teach. We will do, that is, a new agency will certify whether the knowledge, skills, and competences you say you have as a person actually are demonstrable. And so we're proposing a kind of radical rethink of the whole credentialing business. And if you change assessment, if you change the credentialing business using competency-based assessment, you change the dynamic of teaching and learning and liberate the system. So I would predict, given that by then we'll have artificial general intelligence, we'll also be playing around with quantum computing, and robotic teacher support will be a very advanced stage by then. I can see either you go to university or you don't. It doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference is what you know and what you can demonstrate as skills. And we don't really care where you got that knowledge and that skill set. So I think that's the game changer, is stopping the institutions from being the arbiters of credentials. And I think that's what AI will enable.
Very interesting, the interplay in this discussion between the concept of knowing and the concept of learning. and the extent to which education has historically been about to know, as opposed to imparting a passion for learning, which we've seen in our youth series, the relevance of continuous learning throughout one's life, given the rate of change is not going to get slower.
There's a fantastic Calgary study of what Calgarians are doing on the adult learning front. There are 34,000 learning opportunities in the city of Calgary, only 16% of which connect to a public institution, whether it's a school system, a college system, or a university, or other kind of public system. The rest are from maker spaces, voluntary organizations, and so on. The other thing we found was that around about 40% of Calgarians spend 10 hours a week in self-learning using YouTube or whatever it may be. And so the real challenge we have is, how do we leverage that knowledge and skill that people are working on because they care? How do we leverage that to build productivity and competitiveness and jurisdictional advantage? And so that's part of the exploration that a whole group of us are working on through the Canada West Foundation and others.
Well, this message is not just a message for professionals in education. It's a message to industry that individuals coming to you in the future, you want to make sure that they're continuous learners because you're the imparters of knowledge. You're giving the skill sets that they will need for your tasks, your projects, your industry, but they need to come to you as continuous learners, and that's what you would be screening for.
Yeah, and we have such a big skill shortage in this country that we are not going to achieve the economic prosperity we're capable of until we actually deal with the skills crisis that we face.
Okay, so I mean that's a good wrap-up point. But is there anything further you wanted to add? We are in wrap-up now, and I give you a chance to sort of wax eloquent on any other topic that you think is relevant to this point.
Well, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, we need to regulate AI. It's time to regulate this thing," and I say, "Look, don't. It's far too early. It's not as if this thing is mature. We've been at it for a long time, since the 1950s with AI. But if we over-regulate now, we will inhibit the potential innovation that AI will produce. It would be like trying to regulate the internet in 1986, way before it became kind of dominant in about 2000. So it's too early for anything other than privacy and security issues. We don't want to over-regulate this space. We want the freedom to play. And that's critical.
It's interesting because so often the overdoing of caring leads to overprotection and actually impeding the very objective of the carer.
Yeah.
So you've landed on a very important point of the distinction between overcaring, meaning overprotection, and undercaring, meaning leaving the individual free without discipline. So thank you, Stephen. This has been superb. The professions in healthcare, the professions in education, most of the professions have earned or been given exclusivity by government to have an exclusive right of practice because there was concern of snake oil on the market. And so they delegated the authority to the professions to practice healthcare, to practice teaching, etc. That may well be coming to an end. If in fact AI is a new player in the game, then exclusivity is no longer in the domain of the professions alone. And so AI becomes either an aid to the professional or an alternative, which is where the job loss fear was. So Peter, I'm going to ask you, looking ahead to 2034, 2040, another 10, 15 years, what's your preferred future for the caring professions in an AI-rich world?
The opportunity is to not just enrich, but to meaningfully improve quality of life of regular people, quality of life and work life of the healthcare professions themselves. And it would be great if we could define health outcomes and health experience as performance targets. We don't do that right now. We don't do enough of actually listening and measuring what outcomes matter to real people. We don't do that enough in the context of healthy work environments either. So whether it's social services, it's healthcare services, it's primary care, I think an AI-rich world can help enable listening in a far greater degree to what matters to individuals to create a better engagement in the design of whether it's rehab, it's quality of end life, it is the way you recover, primary care, and looking at, being your best self regardless of your age. There's lots of different ways of embedding it, but I think it's the healthcare will always be a service. This is a digital or technology enabled service that requires an enhancement to yield better performance, and the performance has to be around health outcomes.
Okay. Randy, you got the last word. Your turn.
I mean, I love the optimism that Stephen has in terms of the possibility, and I agree with him in terms of it's too early to regulate. I think we have an amazing opportunity here to be able to speak into the build from a design perspective, from a usage perspective. I think from, I was invited in terms of the faith side of things. I think we can bring humanity, we can bring compassion, we can bring so many of this empathy into how we use AI. And I think that's I think our responsibility in the field. In so many ways, it's about, recentering all the work that we do in the health, in the caring areas, around presence, around wisdom, around discernment. This idea, for example, of exclusivity that again that it's been spoken of. In many ways, it's about dialogue, it's about access, it's about co-creation. And so, how do we tap into AI in a way that allows this expansiveness, this generativity to really exist, that builds upon human connection rather than diminishing it?
Superb. Super. Great point to wrap up with. Okay, I'm going to draw on input, commentary, or questions from the audience. Tom, you've been involved with Tom Dodd. You've been involved in drawing on caretakers as a byproduct of some of the situations in your life. Do you see AI playing any role in the world of caretaking as you've experienced it?
Oh yeah, it can be used all through the system in dealing with the different types of problems that the people who have mental challenges, or I dealt specifically with uh, the dementia and related diseases, and that is so complex and so changing and becoming so prevalent in our society that it's really important for us to really use whatever tools we can to make and prevent some of these tragic losses that we have through Alzheimer's and so on.
Well, while it lacks presence, which is a point that Randy made earlier, it certainly gives you information, and it's there 24/7.
Yeah,
It's not going to get emotionally out of control, so it provides you as a caretaker with some aid in order to work with the person who you are being a caretaker for. So it becomes an aid.
yeah, very
Okay,
much.
Jeff, your turn.
From what I'm hearing, I think that the panelists are underestimating the amount of change that's going to be happening in the next few years. If anything, AI seems to be evolving very rapidly. I've just heard that Tesla is building a 1 gigawatt AI data center. That's the comparable amount of energy that a small city uses. And with regards to empathy, I think that we can see animals exhibiting empathy. I'm expecting that AI will be a very good mimic of providing empathy, and also being patient with the individuals that it interacts with, whether those are students or medical patients. So they'll have probably have a better bedside manner than our doctors, which unfortunately don't have the time to take to explain things necessarily fully, or even though my experience with the healthcare system has been good, I know a lot of people who haven't had that experience, and they feel like they're constantly just being kind of rushed out the door. AI will be able to spend more time and give a better experience for that. And I also see the opportunity for with students, and this is being discussed by people like Peter Diamandis, having individual tutors that are able to specialize in each area that the student is studying. And so you might learn physics from a simulated Albert Einstein or something like this. So I think there's huge potential in all of these areas.
Well, if AI results in improved caring, because it's 24/7, it's relational, it's serving as an aid to the caretaker, whether the caretaker be a professional, the caretaker be someone at home, and the market begins to appreciate that. The point that Peter Fenwick made of a revolution being driven from the bottom up may well be the force of change, which government ends up hearing, and government in a public health system has the authority to bring about change, whether the professionals like it or not. Okay, Yogi, your turn.
Thank you, Perry. We've all talked about the change that's coming, the vast change, and I agree with that. And I think AI is going to have an interesting role. There's still an enormous amount we don't understand about the human body and in terms of what we'd like to do in medicine. But I'm fascinated by a couple of breakthroughs, and this is not an exhaustive list. The first one is the figuring out how protein folding works by DeepMind. And that's all over the metabolic pathways of the human body. And I think we're going to finally figure out some aspects of the way the human body works, and that leads to helping in terms of disease management and disease prevention, and perhaps, and hope, even in the mental health side that a number of people have talked to. And the second big breakthrough was accelerated by COVID-19, and that is the whole our mRNA technology. And you've seen, we're observing a number of other uses of that same technology, or adapting of it or extending it. And it's going to lead to huge advances in treatment and medicines. And the CRISPR technology is going to be able to deal with, and has started to deal with, a whole lot of other issues that we have failed to deal with. And maybe we can finally get around the issue of the problem that we're not in, that there's this gap between what individuals in our society seem to be willing to pay for healthcare and what healthcare actually costs. And we're busy pummeling politicians all day long, every day, when we need to look ourselves in the mirror as to what the cause of that problem really is.
You've introduced a topic which we didn't cover in any depth today, which is the biosciences and how AI is affecting the biosciences of discovery, enabling us to deliver what Peter called for, which is improved quality of life, even life extension. Okay, Kelly, you've got a point or a comment you'd like to make?
I really appreciate all the different points of view, because I look at this from a very specific one, and just hearing all the different, there's a lot more to this than I thought coming into the call. I'll say that. I look at this from the perspective of somebody that facilitates human work-life transformation for people in difficult situations. And we do that over tech. And we leverage tech as much as possible to increase our connection with people. And as example, we are automating the resume writing experience, which allows us to spend more time with a person, understanding who they are and the value that they bring. So we're automating everything that we can in order to increase that human touch that they feel in going through our process. So that's from a system perspective for us, but from a human perspective, I'm not in the business of preparing the world for our participants. I'm in the business of preparing our participants for the world. And I can say that I see huge opportunity for people that can access knowledge, whether you're in university or not, as long as you're out of STEM or other fields that require these certifications. I think there's just huge opportunity for people to make massive shifts in what they're doing in their work life by applying knowledge quickly. And I think they're just going to outpace people that are stuck trying to stay in that learning process and not apply it. So I'm really excited for what this has to offer for the people that we serve. Thanks.
Thanks very much for your input. Bogdan, your turn.
So I probably will get the name of Nyquist in this group too, as I had at Alberta Health Services. We have to be very careful of the rate of change, the rate of change. There is that Nyquist theorem that's saying that the entity that should have control should be at least twice as fast, twice as agile as the controlled subject. And the explosive change that AI technology brings violates that principle. So that's one thing. The other thing that comes also from my years in healthcare is that you have to be always aware of what you're outsourcing. As I've mentioned in healthcare, the paper-based workflows have to be preserved and exercised on. Because you cannot outsource the care of the patients to technology. The other thing that will be subject of your future webinar is politics. There is a hierarchy of governance and control, and at the top is politics. So you can struggle to improve as much as you want education or healthcare or other social areas if you don't have the higher level governance in place. Nothing else will work. In 2007, I was part of the amalgamation of the health regions. Then they're splitting out. They'll come back, and so you have to take care of head first, and then the rest of the body kind of would follow. And the last point that I had is what AI is excellent at is mediating integration, so learning and building interfaces. Yeah, the trivial thing is translation, but between spoken languages. But each of us has his or her own dialect, and terms have different meanings and so on. So I have great hopes, given that upper level governance gets addressed, for the impact of AI in education from this perspective, from the perspective of enabling transfer of knowledge at the optimum for each individual, for each student.
When we're into the wrap up and using the equation of supply and demand, what AI is doing is transformative by putting more resources in the hands of those that demand learning, demand healthcare, demand spiritual guidance. And so AI becomes a new player, and the professions haven't had competitors before. They always had exclusivity. And now AI arrives. There's no question that the professions need to figure out what they're going to do about it. I mean, if you read The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleiman, or you read what the Rabinovich talked about in the future of the professions, anyone in the knowledge business can't help but accept the fact that AI is going to be transformative in two ways. One, it will change the nature of delivery because knowledge is no longer exclusive. And secondly, it'll change the nature of the client. It was one step above a slave because they didn't have the knowledge in the past. Now they have access to it, either through better education or, in fact, their own research using AI. So that whole relationship between who knows and who doesn't, the client and the professional, the knowledge and the ignorant, this is transformative. If anyone doesn't see this as a tsunami, as a revolution, and if expectations rise, because AI doesn't make a big mistake along the way, and we don't overregulate or underregulate. If no major mistake gets made, market demand is going to be the force that will bring about change, whether that is brought about by a government mandating, professions themselves seeing the opportunities, or corporations finding that they can offer something better than what the professions have done in the past. This is competitive. We have a competition underway, and if anybody doesn't see it or acknowledge it, I think they ought to spend some time taking a look at AI. Barry, is something you want to say, Reese?
Yeah, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, very quickly. The issue that concerns me, and it was Bogdan's too, is that the rate of change because of AI and how it's operating and how the future looks is very, very great. And if we don't have regulators trying their best to regulate so that what I always call the forces of darkness and evil, but the bad guys, so that we don't have mistakes made in the regulatory side, this is going to get out so far ahead of any possibility of stopping that kind of use of AI that it could very well have a quality of life negative impact rather than positive impact.
But you're not alone, Barry. The industry itself is begging for the industry to pay attention to when AI begins to talk to itself, when it develops a language it doesn't understand, when things begin to happen. The industry itself wants to monitor that and self-regulate. It's begging government to take a role in the regulatory process. Suleiman's book on the coming wave says we've got to contain it. His concern is the utopia that is promised is at risk, and humanity is potentially at risk because this thing can go off on its own. So for all of the promise, there is an importance of recognizing that there are risks, and regulation is a critical part. We'll get into that in the wrap-up session when we get into governance and we get into the wrap-up of what we've learned through this series. We've been dealing with WOW now for 6 episodes, and we've got 2 more yet to go. There's plenty of WOW yet to come.